The question of what happens after death has fascinated human beings for thousands of years, and within Buddhism this question is approached through experience, observation, and deep psychological insight rather than dogma or blind belief. When exploring the Buddhist view on rebirth, it is important to understand that Buddhism does not teach a permanent soul that travels from life to life. Instead, it explains rebirth as the continuation of a process, a flow of consciousness shaped by causes and conditions, much like a flame lighting another flame, connected, but not the same. The Buddhist understanding of death and rebirth aims not to frighten or comfort but to help us live with clarity, responsibility, and compassion. When a person dies, according to Buddhism, the physical body ceases functioning, and the mental continuum, an ongoing stream of moment-to-moment conscious events, does not simply vanish. Rather, it transitions into another form according to the momentum created by actions, intentions, and habits accumulated throughout life. This momentum, known as karma, is not punishment or reward but a natural law of cause and effect. Just as planting an apple seed eventually leads to an apple tree, the mental states we cultivate shape the conditions of our next existence. Rebirth is therefore not a transfer of a soul but the continuation of patterns. When we die, the Buddhist texts describe a dissolution of physical elements and mental states. The body becomes still, warmth fades, breath ceases, and sensory perception dissolves. Simultaneously, the subtle layers of the mind undergo transformation. In Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, these stages are described in elaborate detail within teachings about the bardo, an intermediate state between death and rebirth. In early Buddhism, the moment of death is described more simply but with the same essence. The last moment of consciousness gives rise to the first moment of a new consciousness, conditioned by karmic tendencies. Death is seen as neither an end nor a beginning but a transition within a larger cycle. This cycle, samsara, is the ongoing process of birth, aging, death, and rebirth that continues until full awakening is realized. Because nothing in Buddhism survives unchanged. Each new life is shaped but not determined by the previous one. Our intentions, attitudes, and behaviors form a blueprint, influencing the conditions into which consciousness will re-emerge. Buddhism explains rebirth without relying on eternalism, the belief in a permanent soul. Instead, it uses the analogy of a flame passing from one candle to another. The flame is not the same, and not entirely different. It is a process that continues through conditions. If we think of ourselves not as fixed beings but as a constantly changing stream of thoughts, perceptions, memories, and emotions, rebirth becomes easier to understand. The person who wakes up each morning is subtly different from the one who fell asleep the night before. We do not have the same thoughts, cells, or emotions, yet we say, "This is me." In the Buddhist view, death is simply a larger transition in the same ongoing process of change. It is the continuation of a stream shaped by craving, fears, compassion, wisdom, and actions. The Buddhist explanation of rebirth is deeply tied to karma. Karma means intention-driven action, not fate or destiny. Every intentional thought, word, and deed leaves an imprint, a subtle mental seed. These seeds don't simply disappear at death but carry forward the tendencies of the mind. If someone lives with anger, greed, and confusion, their mind becomes conditioned by these states, and upon death, this conditioning influences where consciousness reappears. Similarly, a mind cultivated with generosity, love, patience, and clarity plants seeds that give rise to more harmonious states of existence. Rebirth, then, is not arbitrary but shaped by the momentum of our inner world. Buddhism encourages ethical living because every moment shapes our future and even our future rebirths. But what exactly is reborn? Not a soul. Not a fixed identity, not a permanent I. Buddhism teaches the principle of anatta, or no self. This does not mean that nothing exists but that nothing exists independently, permanently, or identically from moment to moment. We are a dynamic process made of body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness, constantly shifting. When death occurs, this process continues, carried by causes and conditions. A helpful metaphor is a river. It flows continuously but is never made of the same water. There is a pattern but no permanent essence. Rebirth is the continuation of that pattern. Different Buddhist traditions describe death and rebirth with different levels of detail, but the core principle remains the same. In Theravada Buddhism, rebirth happens instantly. The final moment of consciousness in one life gives rise to the first moment in another. There is no intermediate state. The process is immediate and seamless. In Tibetan Buddhism, however, the Bardo teachings describe a transitional period lasting up to 49 days. During this time, the consciousness experiences various visions and mental states, influenced heavily by lifelong habits and emotional tendencies. Beings in the Bardo are said to be capable of perceiving their potential parents and the conditions that will shape their next birth, drawn to them by karmic resonance. Although these descriptions differ, both schools emphasize that the nature of the next life is shaped by the mind at the moment of death and by lifelong karma. In Buddhism, being mindful and peaceful at the moment of death is seen as extremely important. It is the last moment in which one can consciously influence the direction of rebirth. Because the mind becomes subtle, clear, and sensitive during the dying process, even small moments of clarity or compassion can have a profound effect. Traditions often encourage chanting, meditation, or guidance for the dying person to help the mind settle. The state of mind at death can direct the flow of consciousness toward more peaceful rebirths. This is why monks often emphasize the importance of lifelong practice. We cannot expect a peaceful mind at death if we never train the mind during life, so where exactly does one get reborn? Buddhism speaks of multiple realms of existence, some pleasant, some painful, some neutral. These include human, animal, heavenly, and other states influenced by karmic tendencies. These realms are not meant to be taken as literal places in the same way we understand physical geography. Instead, they symbolize mental states and existential conditions. For example, a heavenly rebirth symbolizes states of bliss and ease, while an animal realm can represent ignorance or instinct-driven existence. Whether literal or metaphorical, these realms reflect the psychological truth that the quality of our mind shapes our experience. Each rebirth, whether physical or symbolic, is a continuation of habits built over many lives. One of the most important truths Buddhism teaches about rebirth is that the cycle is not endless unless we remain trapped in ignorance and craving. Rebirth itself is not the goal. The practice of Buddhism aims at liberation from samsara altogether. When a person fully understands the nature of reality, impermanence, no self, and emptiness, the cycle of rebirth ends. This state is known as nirvana, the complete cessation of suffering and the end of the cycle. For enlightened beings, death is not followed by rebirth. Instead, the process of craving-driven consciousness comes to a complete stop. This is not annihilation but the end of illusion, the end of the forces that propel the cycle. For most people, rebirth continues indefinitely until wisdom cuts through the misunderstanding that there is a permanent self to defend or cling to. As long as we believe I am this or this is mine, the cycle continues. When attachment dissolves, the mechanism of rebirth collapses. Thus, understanding the Buddhist view of death and rebirth is not merely about what happens after we die but about how we live right now. When we realize that everything we think, feel, and do shapes our future, we become more responsible and mindful. When we see that we are not a permanent self but a changing flow, we hold our identity more lightly. This reduces fear, anxiety, and suffering. The Buddhist view of rebirth also has psychological power. It teaches that none of our efforts go to waste. Every moment of generosity creates a ripple. Every moment of anger creates a ripple. Even if we don't see immediate results, these ripples accumulate and shape our destiny. Rebirth gives meaning to ethical action beyond the boundaries of one lifetime. This idea is not imposed as belief but offered as a framework to understand patterns within consciousness. Many people who explore meditation deeply report experiences of expanded awareness, memory-like impressions, or intuitive insights that feel connected to past lives. Whether these are literal memories or symbolic expressions of deep subconscious patterns, Buddhism accepts them as part of the mind's vast landscape. Ultimately, the Buddhist teaching on what happens after death encourages us to live with clarity and compassion. We cannot control everything that happens to us, but we can shape our habits, thoughts, and reactions. This shaping continues beyond death. The question is not whether rebirth is a metaphysical fact but how we can live so that our future, whatever form it takes, is more peaceful and wise. Death becomes less frightening when we see it as part of a journey. Instead of an end, it is a doorway. Instead of erasing us, it transforms us. Understanding this inspires us to practice mindfulness, generosity, patience, and insight. These qualities are the true companions that follow us beyond this life. They are the seeds that bloom again and again, revealing not who we are, but what we create through our actions. In the end, the Buddhist view on rebirth is not a doctrine to believe but an invitation to investigate our experience. By observing the impermanence of thoughts, the changing nature of emotions, and the absence of a fixed self, we begin to see how rebirth is happening even now, from moment to moment. One thought dies and another is born. One emotion fades and another rises. The self we cling to is constantly being reborn in each instant. Death is only a larger shift in this. Thanks for watching. Our channel is new and needs your support. In our channel you can find many videos on the history and philosophical teachings of Buddhism. Please subscribe to our channel to support the teachings of Buddha on YouTube.